Michael actually referenced this movie in one of his talks. I had never heard of Private DOS before. And when he mentioned it, I went on a research rampage of just, man, I got to know more about this guy. It just rattled me in the best of ways. And then the movie came out around, around that time. And when I was praying through and beginning to have the conversations of what the church was going to look like. Long story short is first time I watched that movie just was wrecked. And I didn't know why. I've not served in the military before. I have a lot of family members who are veterans and in our lineage. And so I've always had the utmost respect for servicemen and women. But I just trying to figure out, like, I wasn't a first responder. Like, what is this in me? Why is this getting to me this way? This mission of rescue and the way that he went about it and the very things that you guys mentioned. And so anyway, I did the next best thing. Like, I didn't serve, but I went and found someone who did. And I interviewed him. And it's funny, man, I got this search and rescue journal back. I mean, this was like 2012 is when I got this. This is back search and rescue days when search and rescue was the pinnacle resource of Zoweh. And it's like barely holding together. And so I went and interviewed him, and I wanted to share that with you from what he shared. And then we'll go into a little bit of conversation tonight. But before I do that, I want to just give some context to why I started with that clip and why I feel led to move in this direction. Number one, thank you guys for being here. Thanks for taking the time, even though you knew Greg was going to be out. No special guest, no Gary Barkalow tonight, but appreciate you guys still being here. It's good to be with you. Good to see your faces. And then secondly, when I told Greg that I would take the host for tonight, we talked about what was the conversation going to be on? Well, and he wanted to talk about leadership and the difference between lovership and leadership. And I was like, so I got to send an email and a text to a bunch of men and call it lovership. Like, I don't know, that sounds a little weird. That's something that Greg would say 100%, but Josh has to say it. And so we laughed about that, but man, it's so true. It is so true. And if you've been in any form of leadership, you know that to be true. You know that true, good leadership requires lovership. It requires love. Absolutely requires love. And so as I was praying through that, I was led back to that clip, Private DOS, his story. And then that took me back to my journal. And I just wanted to share. I'm just jotting notes in this. So it's not like it's some concise, report. So just bear with me. But just same thing. Listen with your heart when I read some of these things. He was enlisted back in March 1990, active duty for 14 years as a medic and an EMT. And I asked him what that meant. He said, well, I pull people out of trucks, helicopters, and foxholes. That he served in Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan during Desert Storm. He was around during Black Hawk Down. Some of you guys know what I'm talking about. He was there. And when I began to ask him about some of the men that he would meet on the battlefield, some of the men that he trained with, he said that they weren't just, they started out as strangers, but they quickly became more than that. It became guys that you live your life with. And he said, you know how much someone means to you when you can tell the story of their scar. I was with you when you got that bullet hole. I was with you when you got that wound. I remember the story. I was there. I asked him in his opinion, what does a medic embody? He said healing, security, safety, and survival. He said there were men that I would see walking around that were living because I was there. He didn't say that in an arrogant way. He said it in a very humble way. He understood the mission. He understood the weight. He understood the opportunity. When it comes to a medic, and again, all this applies to leadership, do what you can, and then put them into the physician's hands, right? He wasn't the physician. He didn't try to be the physician. He did what he could do, and then he put them in the physician's hands. He said, well, anytime that I met an immediate need, it created a lifelong bond. It built a trust. Anytime I met an immediate need, I can't breathe. My arm hurts. I'm bleeding. Those are all signs that men around your circle are singing and saying every Wednesday night or every Tuesday night. They might not physically be bleeding. They might not physically have an issue with breathing, but that's what they're saying, right? In their stories, in their pain, in their cry for help. Anytime I met an immediate need, it gave us a lifelong bond, build a trust. I thought this was really sombering and powerful. Oftentimes, medics are the last people that dying soldiers see. My top priority was to bring them confidence and hope. Really good. I thought this was great when it comes to orientation. You think about maybe you've never had a bomb go off 3/4 of a mile away from you, which is the story I'm about to tell you. But there certainly have been supernatural bombs that have gone off in your life, in your friendship's life, in the men in your circle, in their lives, right? And if you've ever been in around any type of situation like that, it can be very disorienting. And I remember during 9/11 and I was younger, I was in middle school then. But I remember watching everything on TV, all those things unfold. And while the mass chaos, pandemonium was, there were people running around, of course, there always was one or two. There was always one or two who could orient themselves and go after them, guide, direct. So say all that to say in his story, talking about leadership, says in the middle of a city that I was in, a bomb went off. I was about 3/4 of a mile away, but we were not moving away from the action. We were moving towards the action. We had to crawl from building to building underneath vehicles to get in position. All I had was a map of the underground. We literally had to go through the sewers to get to where the explosion had happened. Yeah. Inconvenient, dangerous, but mission critical, right? Leadership is so inconvenient, dangerous, but it is mission critical. I think that's why lovership has to be a key ingredient of leadership. Because when things are inconvenient and when they're hard and when they're dangerous, if love isn't there, if love isn't the foundation, it'll be so easy to go the opposite way, to not go. Anyway, this is a good thought too. In terms of moving about enemy occupied territory, C.S. Lewis says that's what this world is. Enemy occupied territory. We have to remember that. And my medic friend said, there's always a weapon. There's always an enemy unit not accounted for. Your reports, your satellites, your scouts, they report what they see. There's always unseen enemies. So be prepared. Be ready to adjust. Leadership, right? So many of these things apply. And then the last thing, and I will never, ever forget this, it's going to be tattooed somewhere on my arm or shoulder or something one day. I got to figure out a way to do it. But he said, the guys that he started with, the strangers that I mentioned that became brothers, he said, we started training conjoined at the hip. That's how we were trained in a unit, hip to hip, shoulder to shoulder. But when we were done, we were joined at the heart. And man, Like anytime I've ever done a leadership, anything, that's been the heartbeat of what I've tried to communicate. If that's not your goal of leadership, I don't know if you're qualified to be a leader. That how we start is not how we're going to finish. It's the goal of every coach, right? It's the goal of every commander. It's the goal of it should be. All the best coaches, all the best leaders, all the best commanders, they want that. We're going to start training. We have to be this. You have to be in proximity because that's what's required. But at the end of it, you want to be in proximity, right? You want to be connected. You want to be have intimacy between you, right? You want that for sure.